Polskę, tato na Sylo może practice Czech. So, hi to everyone, I'm happy to see you here, and the first thing that I want to give you introduction to Tinel. It's a meetup, but something new, something we hope that we will build something different in Split and give something to our community back. So, how it all started. A year ago, we got this idea to build, because we are traveling a lot, we are going to many conferences, and we decided that we want to build something for our town. Also, we were involved in organizing Shift conference for 3 years, so we have some experience with events and with community. We're also doing a lot of work with the Faculty of Economy and as here in Split. So we wanted to build something a little bit informal, different, and to give you some very good talks from speakers that are not from our country. As I already told you, we worked on this for a year. The reasons were different why we didn't start it before. The latest reason why we didn't start, we didn't have a name. So we decided 1 week to build a name and build an entire brand about this Tinel thing. And this is what we are presenting you now. So why Tinel? How many of you knows what Tinel means in Deutsch language? Okay, a few of them. Actually, Tinel means living room. So this is what we want to build. We want to build this kind of environment. We want to give you a feel as you are in your home and to talk about some, I don't know, topics about business design, development, whatever. So we won't focus on one particular topic like PHP, .NET or something like that. We'll focus on various topics here. So why Tinel is different? Tinel is different because we want to give a community something for everyone. So different kind of topics from business, design, development, user experience, open source, whatever, and we want to bring top speakers here to Split. We met a lot of interesting people, great speakers in conferences all around the world, and we want to bring him to Split to show our town, to give them opportunity to talk to you. So what Tinel is offering? Tinel is offering unique lessons, networking with food and drinks, and the most important thing, it's a great place for networking. So we will give you a very relaxed environment to make some new connections, to talk about maybe a project, maybe a business, to meet some new people. So it's like kind as every other meetup, but a little bit different. We want to make it more relaxed, more informal. What are our expectations from the Tinel? So we want to be a little bit different, as I told you in the previous slide. We want to learn new things, and we want you to learn new things, and we want to make community even bigger. So we want to make people to hear about our communities, to come here to meet us and to learn us new things. Of course, we want to have fun, but whatever we do with Locastic, with Tinel, we want to make it fun for them. Of course, this won't be possible without our sponsors. So we have Tech for sponsoring the food. Thank you, Islam. We have also Barba as our local beer craft. So we have 4 different kinds of Barba here today, and we will try to have it in every meetup. Also, we have dessert partners, so it's bigger cakes, and all of these companies are also from here. Any questions? I want to be really short about this because we have a very interesting talk from the panel, so there is no question. I'm really happy to have Paweł today here. He will talk to you about open source and building business on top of open source, and in upcoming weeks we will present you the topics for next event. So follow us on meetup.com, follow us on Facebook. If you have any questions, approach to Mark or me or anyone from the Locastic, ask whatever you want to know, and I hope you will have a nice time listening to our here today. So big applause for Paweł.
Okay, hi everyone, and thank you Anthony for the introduction. This is the first Tinel meetup, so I don't know what are the rules. Should I sit there? I mean, pretty weird for me because the first talk I'm doing sitting. So maybe I can take this spot for the Q&A. First of all, thank you, Antonia and Locastic and all the sponsors for making this possible and bringing me here from Łódź. Okay. Okay, now it should work. I'm a developer, so technical problems are necessary. My name is Paweł Jędrzejewski. I'm founder of Sylius, and in a couple of next slides, I will tell you what Sylius is. I've been involved in open source for my entire professional career. It started from open source. I landed my first full-time job as a remote developer for a French agency thanks to open source. Then I was freelancing thanks to open source. I started my agency business with open source based on Sylius. And now this year we are transforming into a product company seeking investment and continuing to build the business. So it's been a quite exciting adventure, and I'm really happy to be here today and share some of my experiences, some of tips that may help you use open source in both your career as a developer or if at some point you decide to build a company, especially a technology company. I came here from Łódź. It's an exact center of Poland, and I love my city, but after having a beer and a great burger at the beach here today, it will be difficult to go back. So I'm pretty jealous, and I need to come back here for holidays. Everything I will tell you will somehow revolve around the PHP community because I started originally as a PHP developer, and everything we do is related to PHP. But generally, all the rules apply to basically any language. It's not everything I will say is in any way not isn't specific to PHP at all. I will be talking about also projects from the PHP ecosystem. But again, it doesn't matter if you're a Java or JavaScript or Python developer. Pretty much the same thing goes for all communities. So to give you some background about Sylius, it's an e-commerce framework, a fancy named framework. Basically, it's an e-commerce platform that is designed specifically for tailored e-commerce solutions. So it's a bit different from Magento or PrestaShop, where end user without much technical knowledge can install it and basically build a shop with a couple of clicks or configure everything in the admin, and there's an option for every possible type of e-commerce. We basically build the foundation for you as a developer to create custom e-commerce applications, subscription services, marketplaces, very tailored e-commerce shops that prefer deep customization over flexibility of having everything in the backend, for example, configurable in the admin hub. And to give you some perspective, it started in 2011 from a single push to GitHub repository. I shared my code, and somehow other people found it interesting. Right now we have almost 400 core contributors, almost 4 million downloads. I think right now every day there's a couple of hundred downloads. I think around 2,500 downloads of Sylius package, of the main Sylius package, and other packages in total go in thousands. We have over 500 developers in our Slack community. Slack is a great tool if you want to waste time. Almost 700 people help us translate Sylius into different languages, and I would say this is one of the areas where we use open source most effectively, because we don't do anything related to that. Basically, we just set up a service. Actually, there's a company that provides a SaaS tool for translating. Let's say you have a marketing campaign and you need to translate it into multiple languages, and you want to use a tool to coordinate it. This is what they do commercially, but for open source they're for free. So we basically set up the crowding platform and just told people, okay, if you want to translate, go there, and Sylius is translated into a lot of languages without pretty much any effort or investment from our side. And among developers, we are the top 6 e-commerce platform on GitHub. So it's been a while since 2011, but we managed to grow the community and the project to a quite impressive stage. So, but let's start with what is open source. Because when people hear open source, they think, okay, this is stuff for free and code on GitHub. I think to really understand and benefit from open source, we need to understand it's basically a philosophy and way of working with other people. Because one of my hobbies is economics, free market economics. So I look at open source from economical perspective, and basically, if there's a problem which is big enough for a certain amount of people, it gets much more effective to solve it together than every single company developing the same thing in-house, putting it the simplest words possible. But to put code on GitHub, it's not enough to call it open source. Open source is about community building, coordinating this community, building a platform that is then used to grow the project and grow the whole ecosystem. So yeah, the open source is a crowd of people who have the same problem and they work together on solving it using the preferred ways, tools, methodologies, and sometimes a preferred programming language, because it's just every individual developer has some preference. Yeah, so if you look at open source projects, it's not only about the code itself, it's also the ecosystem. It's plugins, themes, integrations, other projects integrating with you. So it's very open source is much more than just giving away the code for free. Okay, before you dive into the world of open source, it's worth understanding some differences in licensing. Of course, we have the proprietary license, which basically means nobody can use and the code is not public. This is not open source. Then we have GPL, for example, and MIT. What are the differences? For some applications, very user-oriented, GPL may be better at protecting some of your rights. So if you are starting a business and you want to be really protected and be sure that nobody copies or resells the code you produce, then GPL is a good option. There are a couple of other alternative licenses, and there is MIT. MIT is pretty much almost public domain, because the only thing you need to do with MIT license projects is basically keep the credit, keep the copyright in the source code, and then you can use the code for whatever you want. So you can resell it, you can modify it and sell it, any commercial and non-commercial use. And while it may sound scary, it's really about the type of the project. Sylius is MIT licensed, and we don't have any issues with that. I mean, there have been at least 2 companies who basically copied it and renamed it to something else, added a couple of features, but it never worked out because it's still pretty technical product. And also the biggest value is not in the code itself. The code is, I mean, if you have enough money, you could replicate the code pretty much. The value goes much beyond the code itself. It's about the community. Okay, so what kind of companies can you build with open source? There are mainly 2 types. It's a service company and product company. And I will be telling you a lot of good things about open source. I'll also tell you some bad things and challenges that you may encounter if you decide to start a business with open source project. And generally, my conclusion after a couple of years, it's not easy, because building a business is not easy. So open source is more of a tool than a way to build a business. It's a tool that you can use in marketing and many other areas. So the first type is service. So basically, you develop some kind of software. It can be CRM, ERP application, e-commerce application, whatever. You build it, you give it away for free, and then you sell services. What kind of services can you sell? Obviously, it's all kinds of one-on-one or one-on-team consulting, so you can help other teams to decide about the architecture, because you always do some customizations to open source projects. Customers who choose open source, usually one of the main factors that that affect the decision is the ability to customize the software, to adapt it to their specific business needs. So you can make a lot of money and build pretty good business around services. Of course, as with every service company, the problem is people. You need to have enough people, and to scale your services, usually there is some crazy high point of hourly rates that you can charge for consulting or training people. So to do more of it, you need more people. You need to hire more people. So like I said, it's consulting, it's also hosting services or training sessions. It can be both on-site training sessions, so let's say that I come to Locastic for 3 days and to train the team, or it can be a group training. For example, I say, okay, on this day in Paris there's a training, there are 10 seats available, and whoever is interested can sign up and pay for the seat. And then we have product companies. Obviously, product companies have a product. So they sell, they, for example, can have a SaaS solution, or they can sell a license for the software. And here it's getting especially difficult with, I mean, in a way, open source gives you a lot of benefits, and I will talk about it, but at the same time, it brings some of the challenges, because how do you started with something that is free, and then you need to sell it on a license. So it's getting complicated, and I will give you some examples of companies who do that and how it affects the community and the business itself. Okay, so what are the challenges? Let's start from the hard part of open source. The founder of Easy Publish project, which now is a really big company doing enterprise CMSs, once told me via Skype call that at one point he was at the stage that Sylius is right now, and the biggest challenge was to keep the balance between the commercial work that you do and open source, because yeah, it's not like like I said, it's not about making the code public and available, because open source doesn't work like this, that you take your custom project, you turn the switch on GitHub and change the private repository to public, and then it's open source. Open source is about roadmap planning, it's about setting up support channels for a community, it's about coordinating community efforts, answering questions on Stack Overflow, Slack, whatever other channels you set up for community to communicate. So it's really, it basically costs time. It takes a lot of time, and very often it's a long-term investment, but it's worth it, and I will tell you why. So the challenge number one is keeping the balance between for example, especially for agencies, which are basically dependent on the number of hours that they spend on customer projects. This is one of the problems that we had at the agency that I was previously working on. Basically, for us it was difficult. Like, okay, so this week we work on open source, and it's difficult to measure how much return on investment you get. There are ways to do this, and it totally makes sense. But this is the first challenge. The second challenge is you need to build a community. Like I said, it's not only about getting the code for free. It's about building community. So you need to deal with people from all around the world, because you don't decide on who works with your project. With community, one of the challenges I face is like today when I was picked up by Antonio at the airport, I was stopped by a phone call from some company from Egypt, and they were asking if Sylius supports right to left user interfaces. So you get a lot. You will, as you are going global, you just push, and with platforms like GitHub, it's very accessible to your code will be discovered by people from all around the world. You will get a very diverse community, and I'm not the biggest problems from community are not some personal conflicts or anything. I mean, it's 6 years and I don't really recall any dramas. I mean, maybe we are not big enough, but it's mostly about people expectations. Companies from Asia want different features, companies from States handle taxes a bit differently than we in Europe. So we will have a community that pushes you towards their specific needs. And it's difficult to decide what feature, what functionality should be implemented to satisfy and avoid pissing off other parts of the community. And like I said, with the product company, there is something I call the free product trap. So at some point when we were doing Sylius, we forgot about making money. Because we kickstarted the company, we made a lot of money, relatively speaking, and we said, okay, now we have this money, we have the team, let's work on the product. And we were so passionate about working on the product, on the open source, giving away all this work for free. Of course, we got the return on investment in terms of marketing, bigger community, more leads, more partners, and so on. Of course, it was great, but you can fall into this free product trap where you're so passionate about the open source community that you forget that you need to make money. I think the only open source projects that are successful are somehow backed up by successful businesses. And the goal of this talk is that hopefully some of you will at some point start open source project and also build a business around it, because this is the only scenario where it succeeds. I mean, everyone needs to eat, and with money you can do really great things for the community. So don't forget about making money, and always have a solid business plan behind what you do with open source. I will show you later a tool and some strategic advices that will help you stay on track. Yes, the code alone won't sell. I mean, this is the first trap that every developer falls into, and actually it doesn't matter if you do open source or you just start development agency. So you think that, like, my code is so awesome, it's fully tested, it's using the latest technologies, latest everything, and basically there is no better code on GitHub than this, and now I just need to wait when people knock on my door and throw money at me. It doesn't work at all. I mean, it's pretty obvious now, and probably for some of you it's obvious, but the code alone won't sell. And I'm not saying this is about community. Community will help you sell, will help you build your product, will help you grow, but it also won't sell for you. I mean, you need to actively sell your product. You need to target the decision makers who usually don't have a clue what is GitHub. And in the end, these people will pay for your product or service. So code alone won't sell. Okay. Yeah, and people will have expectations even though they get stuff for free. I mean, it's in a sense it's not a problem because okay, you set up a website, you say you have something really cool, you give it away for free, it's open source, but you say it has all the features and it's working and it has been successful for this and this and this company. So people, even though they don't pay you a dime, they will still have expectations. You need to be prepared for it that sometimes someone who didn't even pay you a single euro or dollar will have expectations towards your open source project. And it's I would say some of these people, these are the guys who, for example, will send you a message on Slack like, what the fuck is this feature, why it's not working. Yeah? So you need to be, I'm saying this because you need to be prepared. I like these guys, these are the best. These are the best because and some people in open source community, they have the opposite attitude. Okay, this is for free, I won't complain, I will fix it on my own. But these other guys who have some natural predispositions for complaining, they give you really good feedback. So remember remember to not be too harsh on them. I mean, you should school them about how to interact with people, but otherwise they are good. Yeah, and open source takes your free time. Since 2014, I am working only on Sylius, and all my money comes from Sylius. Everything I do around Sylius, services, products, and so on. But as I said, I started this project in 2011, so it took me a while to basically make a living from open source, if you can call that. That being said, I started when I was still in high school, so maybe I had to do some homework regarding how to make money and how to handle business. It's definitely possible to make money faster, especially if you get some guidance from people who did that before. I really appreciate all the time that I spent with other project founders who basically shared some of the things that I'm passing down to you. But yeah, it takes a lot of your free time that nobody will pay you for, because until you set up the business, until you have the developers that, for example, work on projects, if you go with the service model, before that nobody will pay for any second of what you do on open source. They will pay for your time after you have done it. This is pretty funny tweet about open source. Yes, it sometimes can be harsh. Like especially for projects without a business model behind, because it's a bit easier to handle all the problems that arise in the community, in the roadmap planning. Like last Thursday we deployed new project website, and we added, just for testing for a couple of days, this intercom chat. And 99% of messages is when is the next version? When is the next version? So sometimes when you go to sleep and someone is pinging you in Slack or email or whatever, when is the next version, it can get pretty tough. I also heard this one story of a guy who was working on some Linux extension that was so buggy. I mean, as far as I researched, it wasn't that bad, but some people started collecting some bitcoins to hire a hitman, because he was breaking other projects, basically. And this was, like I said, a low-level C library, so no business model behind it, because it would be quite difficult. Okay, so a couple of things that are hard, and now what are the benefits? Because I went from a single young unexperienced developer. Through open source, I met a lot of companies, a lot of pretty much all the major projects. I gave conference talks in pretty much every major city in Europe, starting from knowing nobody. I didn't even know a single developer in my city, because I dropped out from the university, so I didn't have the opportunity to meet fellow developers. So open source really can compensate for networking. A lot of feedback. This is invaluable, and it doesn't matter if you do open source or not. Customer feedback as soon as possible, as soon as you can get it, is the best value you can get at the very beginning of your company. So I mean, probably some of you who have considered starting a business or think about starting in the future have heard the lean startup and about how in the early startup days learning is the biggest value that the startup generates. So open source can help you a lot with that. I mean, people will spam you with feedback. We have around, I think, coming close to 500 issues on GitHub. At some point it was around 600, and it's not all bugs. It's like, I don't know, 50 to 80 maybe bug reports, and the rest is feedback, RFCs, new ideas, feature requests, some environment problems on different hosting platforms, and you pretty much get all this for free. Of course, you need to make the investment to organize the environment and the community, but you will get a lot of feedback. And the cool thing is, we built Sylius with under 10 people, under 10 developers, and we just, it was over a couple of we started in 2014 as a company, and this was the first time when there was a team working on Sylius. Previously, it was just me coordinating random pull requests from the community. And of course, with let's say 10 people over a time span of 2 years, you can work on just a couple of projects, couple of big projects to get to learn things about how things. How e-commerce is handled in Hong Kong and how e-commerce is handled in the US, and what are preferred payment gateways of people in Norway. And it's just impossible to do this as a company, and we know this all. We have the experience from dozens of projects or even hundreds of projects from the open source community. So using open source to get customer feedback can really give you uncomparable amount of knowledge that you will never get, or you need to spend a crazy amount of money on customer research, surveys, and other boring stuff, which is like nagging people to give you feedback. Here it's the opposite. They come to you with the feedback. You don't even need to ask much for it. Networking and distribution. Like I said, pretty much all the connections I have, and the fact that I'm here today with you guys is thanks to open source. So it's a great opportunity for networking. And at one conference in Belgium, I heard that only 1% of developers ever goes to a meetup or conference like this. Only 1% of all developers go to meetups like this, and this is true. With open source, there is no way to avoid conferences. I mean, I went to about 30 events in Europe, and my conference budget is for like maybe 5 conferences, because it's community efforts, and events like this give me ability to come, meet you all, discuss, grab a beer, meet new people, developers, agency owners, and so on. So open source is amazing for networking and distribution. Another thing that you can do is build a partner network. So so other companies who use your open source platform, open source project, can sell your product to the end customers, and you get also this benefit. Testing and Q&A. We don't really on Sylius we have 100% TD workflow. I think we are one of the, of this size, I think we are the only project with such strict testing approach. We use both TD and BD. So we don't really have that much additional Q&A testing. Before maybe big releases, we did a couple of manual testing so that everything installs correctly. But otherwise we don't do this. Because after I tag a release on GitHub, in like half an hour I have all the small bug reports already available on GitHub from people I don't know. They just saw a tweet that, okay, new version is installed. They quickly go to console, composer, create project, blah blah blah, and you get free testing and Q&A. Of course, again, one of the tips that I will give you is to account for the time and money needed to set up this whole open source mechanism. But yeah, you will get a lot of testing and QA for free. Bug fixing and feature contributions. It takes a simple thing as creating an easy pick label on GitHub, which already on GitHub you have a way to label issues for those of you who don't use the platform. And let's say that someone reports a very small bug, that some button is displaying not correctly, or something is calculated a bit off. If we mark it at easy pick, there are people who are not super experienced to maybe implement this huge new feature of product recommendations, but they're perfectly capable of fixing this small bug, and they hunt for these opportunities to participate in the community. So this is also, you can save a lot of development time if you do this with open source community. Innovation. I mean, for me as an employer, my developers sometimes I mean, as a business, you need to chase the innovation all the time, but there is this part of the business that should be pretty stable, and you can't introduce you can't change the JavaScript framework every month, because there is a new JavaScript framework of the month every month. But still, open source brings you a lot of innovation from other projects, and I would recommend, if you ever have developers who are passionate about open source, and there's this type of people who are not only passionate about just coding, but also interacting with other communities, and you should really coach them to interact even more, because there's no better learning experience than going to a community that does similar thing but completely different way, and bringing back this knowledge back to your company and to your project. Higher talent retention rate. It's pretty fancy word for just a simple truth that people are very often attached to company, to your team, but they also get attached to the community, and it very often helps to basically keep developers working with you longer as a business owner, because they have one more reason not to leave the company. And especially if you're fortunate enough that your open source project becomes a bit larger community where there are other companies using it, I mean, the developer working at the company which created the project will always somehow be like more involved in this community, working at this company. So it gets a bit easier. It's still super difficult to keep developers because of the high competition in the job market. But yeah, it's just another reason for them not to leave you. Yeah, and this is free stuff. A lot of free tools are available for open source projects. I would say we easily get a couple of thousand, maybe. Okay, maybe not like in tens of thousands, but a couple of thousands of dollars in value for free, just because we are open source project. It's GitHub, of course. It's Travis. It's Scrutinizer. It's the translation service. It's the hosting, and plenty of things and tools which are available for open source projects for free. So it's another benefit. Of course, you can't use them for your commercial use cases, but if you have this new idea that you would like to explore in a company, this is another reason to make it open source effort. Yeah, it's for us, GitHub is crucial. It's the hub of the community. Everything that is happening around Sylius happens in the GitHub platform. Okay, so some concrete solutions to some of the problems that I highlighted and other tips. First one, if you do anything with open source, remember it's a product like everything else. You just put a 0 on the price tag for it. It's just free, but it's still a product. It has some customer persona, who has some customer journey from discovery of your product to making the purchase. So I mean, in open source sense, a purchase would be someone starting a project on your using your platform. For example, if someone discovers Sylius, he's doing some testing, he joins our Slack, he pings me with some message, I answer, some other fellow core team members help him with fixing a couple of things, he starts to like us, and then he goes to his boss, CTO, or he's the CTO himself, and decides to make the purchase. So choose the product. So we do exactly as I said, this year we are trying to transform into a product company where our revenue streams are not only from custom development, training, and consulting, which was the case until this year. We also try to build commercial products, so licensed software and maybe some SaaS solutions, but we still apply exactly the same methodology to the open source. And this is true even for the smallest image resizing PHP library. This library still has some developer persona. So it's still a product that has some features which satisfy some of the needs of the consumer, which is in this case developer. So I like to say, remember that you have a product in your GitHub repository. It's not just you should think about it exactly as you do about your commercial project. And the same rules you should apply to your commercial business can also apply to your open source projects. Educated experiments, releasing new versions, gathering feedback, releasing next version. All these rules that you hear from startup community that apply to your next Facebook, Tinder, or whatever, also apply to your libraries. You should always make educated and data-driven decisions for your open source project. And like I said, you will get plenty of data and feedback from your customers, so community of developers. Learn, build, and measure. This applies to your open source library as well. And like I said before, use it as a tool. It's not one way of doing things. I call the talk building business with open source, not building business on open source. I mean, you can do that, and you can make open source a foundation of your business, but what I realized after a couple of years working, it's a tool. It's a way to lower your development costs. It's a way for marketing, for distribution, for hiring people. People like to work on community projects. They like to be visible. Almost everyone from my team who started working with me also at some point started doing some presentations at community events. So it's also it's also a tool to grow your team, but it's never like your foundation of your business should be always your product, your revenue streams, your consumer, your customer persona, your accounting, legal, and so on. So it's not like magic. Some people think that all these open source projects, they are just some miracles that you just they release something really cool on GitHub and somehow money appears from. It's a tough thing. All of the big open source projects at some point took investments or introduced commercial licenses, like for example Magento Community Edition and Magento Enterprise, because still, if you want to build a business, you need to build a business. Open source is just a tool. You can use it for user testing. You can use it as, at some point, it can become like part of your R&D department, where you just experiment with new things and release them at open source. And always do this only when it makes sense from your business perspective, because sometimes releasing something as open source can bring you some really maybe not disasters but problems. For example, we had some features in Sylius that we released as open source, like hierarchical role and permission management system, but it turned out that there are only like 3 or 4 companies in the community. At the time, it was around 2 years ago, who used this feature. So there were like maybe 4 or 5 businesses which benefit from the feature, but the entire community was suffering because more features is more bugs, more development, slower release process, and so on. So always release things as open source only with always consider the effect it will take on your business and on your community. Include the extra effort in your time and money budget. It doesn't work to tell your employees, hey, just work on open source, guys. Okay, from today we are open source company, you do open source. Go on GitHub and contribute. It doesn't work like that. This works for small bug fixes, feature contributions, and we all know that developers sometimes need to switch from the task they are doing and then they can go on GitHub. But it's not possible to magically spawn extra couple of hours. So this needs to be a coordinated effort, and you need to basically understand that open source is a tool for your marketing, for development, and you should account for this tool in your time and money budget. So you should reserve some time for developers to work on open source. You should reserve some money for community events or sponsoring some. And there are actually companies in other bigger communities. It happened several times in Sylius as well, in Sylius community, where they basically hire one of developers from the community to work full-time on some features. So it's an investment that you need to take into account in your business planning. And like I said, it's community building is not about going door to door and telling people, hey, join us, we are cool, join us, join us. It obviously doesn't work like that. You need to create a platform. You need to spot the people who are like the cornerstones of this community and coach them. I miss the better word right now, but encourage them to do more of the work they do. Because building a community is not like door-to-door job. It's building a platform. So setting up, for example, a Slack channel, setting up some rules on GitHub, setting a Facebook group, setting up. I'm right now thinking about things that we have set up for our community. Recommending to use a specific Stack Overflow tag and so on. And these are the building the basis for community to grow, coordinating it, but it needs to be a platform that then you just fine-tune the engine, see what things work. For example, we launched 3 different support channels, and now I see that our Facebook channel is not really working great for support. It's working a bit better for business-related discussions, questions, and some roadmap discussions, and we need to change that. We need to announce to the community that okay, from now this is not Sylius developers support group, it's Sylius community where we discuss this and this and that. It goes, the tuning the engine goes down as deep as to creating appropriate channels on Slack where people can discuss meetups in a separate room from performance. And setting up, it took me 2 minutes, setting up a performance discussion room on Slack, discussion channel, already spawned some performance improvements to Sylius. So it's about building the platform for community to grow and not being involved in every single interaction that that happens there. Business community is also crucial. This is, I won't pretend I'm expert at it. I managed to build a strong network of businesses that we work closely together, but we are only starting to create official partner network. But it's also important to remember that it's not only about the community of developers and this somehow organized chaos. It's also about other businesses who invest money in your project and also who implement the project for the customers. And this is important because even though they are not your company, they go to a customer and they say, okay, now we use project X. And I had experiences when someone is contacting me and tell me, hey, it's 3 months now, we are working with your Sylius platform and it's a disaster. But it was selected by some random development agency who didn't even ever contact me for any advice, even free. I'm not telling they should buy something, but it's important to maintain a quality of commercial services in an open source community, and you somehow lose control over who can use your software, because everyone can use. You give it away for free. So creating this kind of partner network can help at least highlight the people who you know and you recommend to work with. And it's not released yet. I already showed it once at SymphonyCon, but I want to, in the next couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, I want to release a tool which is very similar to Lean Canvas. Lean Canvas is like A4 paper, A4 document template that allows you to describe allows you to describe your business within like 15 to 30 minutes. In reality, it takes more because it's iterative process. You sit down with this canvas and modify it pretty much with every idea you come up with. But I want to release this kind of open source canvas, which is adjusted for open source project, because there is no revenue streams when you release something as open source. There are also a bit different segments, and it's always good to look at existing solutions before you release something as open source. That's the first rule open source. Check if nobody else did it before, because otherwise you will have hard time to build community unless you are very different from them. Okay, thank you. I was a bit stressed, to be honest, because it's the first Tinel meetup, and I hope you are happy with the talk. I'll be happy to answer all your questions, and I'll probably stick around here for a while. So if you want to talk open source, e-commerce, or whatever that is, or business in general, then hit me up. Thank you so much. Any questions before we get the beer or something?
What was your biggest mistake?
Being a developer. No. It's my biggest mistake. Yeah, I mean, probably focusing too much on satisfying the part of me that is a developer. But I wouldn't consider it a mistake. It's like growing up process, because for me, what I realized from my entire career, which is quite short, I hope I will have the opportunity to make it much longer. But why we are developers? I started Sylius, and I wasn't passionate about e-commerce in general. I started doing e-commerce because my mom and her sister started a cosmetic selling business called Sylius, and the business failed. Maybe because I was inexperienced developer and the shop wasn't selling so well. I don't know. No, actually, it went bankrupt because the supplier stopped supplying the product. But I liked programming, so I was focusing on the programming aspect. I wanted to make Sylius perfect. And you know, as you probably experienced this before, if you're a developer, what was perfect a year ago is shit code right now. And if you're a developer making progress every year, if you look back, you won't like your code. So I think before going to this stable phase with Sylius that we experienced since last year, we kind of rewrote it 3 times at least. Not from scratch. It was a test-driven evolutionary process, but I was trying to satisfy my like developer ambitions to make it perfect in every aspect, so that the testing suite is the best testing suite on GitHub and so on. This somehow yielded some benefits, but if you realize that you are a developer just to solve people problems in a smart, automated way, and I think there is, for me as a developer, there is nothing more enjoyable than seeing a company that gets more and more users thanks to the users' revenues, customers, and so on, thanks to the features that you develop as a programmer. So just my advice would be to keep in mind why you program, and don't write code just for the sake of writing code. It doesn't work in the long term. Yeah?
Why did you decide to make Sylius open source?
Why I decided to make Sylius open source? Like I said, the first prototype of Sylius was this custom PHP framework and custom PHP e-commerce engine for my family business. And like every developer who wrote their own framework, at some point I realized, okay, I want to develop apps and not maintain the request response workflow or console or cookie processing. This was the boring stuff solved by so many people. So I started looking for a framework and I discovered Symfony. And I must say I owe a lot to Symfony community because Sylius got popular thanks to being based on Symfony in a large part. So I was inspired by other projects. But to be perfectly honest, it wasn't a business decision back then. It was just, okay, let's make it open source and go with the flow. I wouldn't do many things differently. Probably I would just think about business things like how to make money with it a bit earlier. But I'm happy I kind of went with the flow and it evolved as open source from the very beginning.
Nobody was using it before you made it open source.
No. It was, yeah, and I must say I was kind of lucky because I don't really remember early days of Sylius marketing. I just put it on GitHub, I set up a website, and I think most of the traffic was from Google because Symfony was hyping up and people were Googling Symfony e-commerce, for example. Then I did my first talk in Kiev. Ironically, it was sponsored by Magento. And after this conference, more people have picked up the framework, and this is how it grew. Yes?
Which was the point when you started thinking I could make a living from this?
I think I already I knew from the very beginning because my long time dream was to build a business. Like I think many of developers who at some point end up as entrepreneurs. When I was young, I was thinking, okay, I start doing websites for my family, then I do it for customers, then I do it for more customers, then I hire someone and I have a company. So I was always thinking this way that, okay, at some point there is a possibility of completely making a living from open source. I think it was at freelancing stage. I just saw that there is a demand for my consulting and training services. So while I still was developing custom projects, I would say it was 50-50. Like 50 of freelancing was consulting and 50% was custom development on Symfony. I already knew that, okay, I get a couple of requests, so if I hire someone more, he can do this while I think about how to grow the business and so on. So I think the freelancing, because when I worked at one agency, I got a project from them, I did it with the team, it was fun. But I think when you try freelancing, you see the possibilities, that there are more customers interested in your services. Any more questions?
You said during this presentation that you had feature disasters, that several companies were using it and other companies were suffering because of a lot of the bugs. The main question is on which parameters are you deciding which features go into the series?
Thumbs up on GitHub. There's like a reaction icon under every issue. Now it's not very sophisticated method. I still go with my gut. I have much better vision of what Sylius is and what makes it different than I had even a year ago. So it's easier for me, but I don't have any sophisticated. We were actually thinking about creating a tool which allows you to categorize, because we use GitHub as a backlog. So we were thinking about a tool for open source maintainers that allows you to visualize the types of issues, like how many bugs. It kind of GitHub provided some basic, you can filter out issues and see how many bugs you have, but it's not very sophisticated. So we were looking at building a tool like this, but then with our experience we asked ourselves a question, okay, how do we make money from it? Because otherwise it will be, if we just release it as open source, then who will maintain it? And we already have huge projects to maintain and invest a lot of money and time into open source. So we decided to drop this, but it's still worth exploring. I think some tool that helps you manage issues on GitHub and measure. I also count, for example, if a lot of people are asking me through emails, through Slack, through contact requests about specific feature, this is also somehow, I'll be honest, I don't have any magical sophisticated tool which tracks. Like how many people have asked about multi-vendor or wishlist support with Sylius. But there are ways to do this and make data-driven decisions. And there's also one tip: if you already have a feature and you want to see if it's used, just remove it. And you will see with the next release how many people are pissed off. With some features there were people pissed off, and with some features nobody noticed. So sometimes removing is also an option. But just communicate this well before.
So what if like 4 or 5 bigger companies, as you mentioned, use these features and the rest of them don't? What do you do then if you're in that situation? Do you remove the feature or do you make it?
I think this decision is as difficult as, for example, letting your I'm not talking about completely commercial projects, letting your customers grow out of your product. Because let's say that you start a SaaS solution, you get 10 customers, then you get 100, but these first 10 customers have grown so much that your product is not enough. So what do? You invest a crazy amount of money to implement these enterprise features for these 10 customers, or you let them go. And many smart people recommend letting them go. So it's exactly the same tough decision as with commercial project. You would need to, like, if you should always have very well defined segment of the customers for your open source project as well. So if you see that, okay, these features that they are requesting or they're using are very enterprisey, but I target mid-market companies or small companies, then you just need to let go. And with open source, really, it's 6 years when I'm involved, and I don't recall any situation when someone was. I mean, there were some assholes, but really, people are really understanding and polite in open source community. So if you communicate well with them and explain that, sorry guys, we would love to support this, but we can't afford it, and these maybe they can make a plugin for it and maintain it themselves. Sometimes giving a company a bit coaching on how open source works allows them to be active contributors and maintain these features as external extensions or plugins or modules. So there's always a solution, but it's a tough decision. Yes?
Can I answer that question?
Yeah.
You can always continue to maintain those features only for them, but if they pay, that's one way of earning money in open source.
Yes. But then the question is whether the money is worth losing focus. Because it can be a set of features that is targeting a different type of customer.
But it cannot affect other customers.
Yes, it's an option. And it often very often happens in a lot of companies that they just extract the functionality to plugins and maintain them. That's a good point. Okay, any more questions? Okay, thank you so much.